Hi, everyone, and welcome to July's edition of Meet Our Contributors. This is about Kubernetes upstream development and community. This is our Mentors on Demand web series. When you are in need of a mentor, then this is the place for you to ask questions. As far as rules and things are concerned, in order to ask questions, please try the Meet Our Contributors Slack channel. That's what I will be moderating heavily. But if Slack is not your thing, Twitter is also great as well with the hashtag K8SMOC for Kubernetes Meet Our Contributors. Quick rules, panelists, please feel free to ask each other questions. This is also about current contributors as well, not just about new contributors. We do have a code of conduct for all CNCF related communication platforms. That includes the questions that you are asking the panelists, as well as the panelists themselves. Please be kind to each other, everyone. Please feel free to be chatty in the Slack channel. And then let's go into intros. My name's Paris. I do community engagement for Google, specifically on the Kubernetes project, and I am your host today. So let's start with Steve. Steve, do you want to give a quick intro about yourself?
Sure. I work for Red Hat, and I am one of the SIG testing co-leads. I'm trying to keep our merge queue functional today.
James?
Hey, yeah, so I'm James. I work for JetStack. We're a UK-based company. I work on Cert Manager and a number of other ecosystem projects. I try and help out in SIG API machinery as much as I can, usually on Slack with different questions. And I tend to be the one bugging Steve and co on SIG testing about Prow as we run and maintain our own instance of Prow as well. So yeah.
And I know Prow is a frequent question here, so I'm sure we'll have at least one Prow related question. So get ready to both of you. And then Jordan, you're next.
I'm Jordan Liggett. I've been around for a while. I try to fix more problems than I cause. Work a lot on API machinery and CLI and all kinds of things. And then I help lead SIGAuth, and I'm responsible for the authorization and authentication subsystems.
Awesome. And then last but not least, George, you want to weigh in? I know George is on our what I call our ones and twos, our live stream. He's our DJ today.
Hi, I'm George Castro. I work at Heptio as part of the community team there. And I work with Paris and other people in SIG contributor experience to put together programs like this and kind of work behind the scenes and keep the machine rolling.
Yes, and the machine definitely needs to roll, that's for sure. Eeyore from CNCF is actually going to join us as well in, I'd say, about 30 minutes. And when he does, he'll come on and introduce himself, but he will be another resource for everyone. All right. So let's get right into it. The first question is a pretty general question, and that's how'd you get into open source? And feel free to, whoever would like to jump in, and we'll do a little round robin.
So I'd say I started out probably completely unrelated to Kubernetes, trying to fork and run a game called RuneScape and building my own one of those. So that was a long time ago now, but I then kind of stumbled upon Kubernetes probably about 2.5, 3 years ago. I got very lucky finishing university and then joined a company that was going into production pre-1.0, which was okay, kind of worked. And yeah, just been kind of caught up in it ever since.
So long ago in a former life, I used Eclipse a lot. And one day was hitting a bug where it was crashing my development environment. And I remember the moment where I realized that I could actually go figure out where the bug was in the source and fix it and fix my own problem and make life better for other people and get my name in the contributor release notes for the next release. And at that point I was hooked. Just the idea that you can take responsibility for things and figure out things and make other people's lives better. And so then being at Red Hat for the last 5 years, working on Kubernetes, that's been like that on steroids.
Fair. And then Steve.
I guess I joined Red Hat and then very quickly got indoctrinated into everything that Jordan just said.
So Kubernetes is your first project for upstream development? Very
Yep.
cool. James, what did you say your first project was?
It was actually, there's an online game called RuneScape, and there was a big community around building private servers for it. So that involved kind of reverse engineering their game client, and that was all written in Java. And yeah, long time ago now, and it was a big, messy code base.
Well, that's a great lead into the next question is, you did get started with open source before Kubernetes, with the exception of Steve. Did you have to learn any languages in order to feel like you could be a valuable contributor? And what was like the ramp that you took to kind of be a valuable contributor for those open source projects?
I suppose I kind of started out, that was the very first thing I ever learned. So it started a long time ago with reading lots of Java online articles. A lot of it for me was looking at other people's work. So there were a few others who had done a simple through it. I must admit, I probably spent a year or two not really understanding most things. I remember inheritance was just a thing that was there and I had to deal with, but I didn't really understand why. But over time, I think gradually got there. I kind of understand it now.
And Jordan, what about your ramp?
It's always a balance. Sometimes it was learning a new language with Kubernetes. That was the first Go development I had done. And you're always kind of balancing what is normal and best practices for a language, what is normal and best practices for the particular project you're on, and then what are things that you have learned in your development experience coming from other languages or other projects, and you're always trying to kind of merge those three things. And I would say early on, you want to kind of weight heavily the best practices for the language and the project, and ask a lot of questions just as you're getting familiar with how the project functions. And then as you kind of fully understand the language and the project, then you can kind of bring in your experiences and say, well, this has worked well for me, this has not worked well, and that's really how you can start to contribute to a project. I think a good first step is like finding small things, bug fixes or tweaks, things that don't require sort of knowledge of the whole system, and just get your feet wet that way and kind of grow from there.
Very cool. And Steve, what about your ramp for Kubernetes? How did you, how do you feel like what you did was valuable, and what did you do that really contributed to getting ramped up quickly?
I think it was a combination of being as lazy as I could be, and just learning only the thing that you needed at the time. So for instance, like I think channels and Go routines in Go, I don't think I even bothered to learn until I actually had a need for them, which was way after I started at the project. And just learning piecemeal a couple of things that you needed to do for that specific issue or bug that you were tracking helped make that entire thing more manageable. I mean, Go's a very good language too for new contributors to Kubernetes. Like Go's fairly simple to pick up compared to some of the other ones that exist. So yeah, I think just keeping it simple at the beginning is key.
Keeping it simple is definitely key. Jordan and James, do you have any other advice for people ramping onto Kubernetes specifically?
I would just say ask questions early. It's easy to kind of rat hole on something and start off in a direction that might not be quite right. And by the time you've invested a lot of energy and effort in a particular approach, it can be it can be harder to kind of step back and say, oh, well, maybe this other approach would be better. So finding someone in the Slack channel or tagging someone in one of the SIG meetings saying, can you answer some questions about this? The bot does an okay job at kind of pinging people related to the packages when you open a PR, but sometimes it's actually better to get feedback before you even open a PR. So ask questions.
Yeah, I'd second that. I think Slack's a really good resource for kind of just informal chat, trying to get information. Well, trying to get some advice on stuff. I think also don't get discouraged by the bots and things like that. There's a lot of, they can be quite noisy and they've got a lot to say, but a lot of the time, you know, there's people behind everything. And I think I think anyway, it's a really welcoming community, and there's always someone who would like to help if they're around. So yeah, keep on pinging. Don't worry about annoying people because you're probably not. Yeah.
Or they're probably getting it from 80 other angles, so your one angle won't necessarily add into that pie. All right, well, that's another good lead into the next question, specifically for Jordan, and of course others can answer too. How do you manage your time? Jordan is one of our top contributors, and he is a issue triage powerhouse. I think so folks are really curious as to how you do it. Tell us.
Well, sleep is overrated. I don't know. A lot of it is just trying to synthesize things coming from a lot of different places. So we've got issues coming in, we've got pull requests coming in, we've got stuff going on in Slack, and so I watch the Slack channels for the areas where I work. I have keywords in Slack that ping me anytime someone mentions a topic that I'm interested in, which means I get a lot of pings, but it also means that when there's an issue, it'll kind of show up on my radar because 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 people will be mentioning it. And so I monitor that pretty closely. I will open up incoming pull requests and issues kind of the first page or two on GitHub, probably once a day. Just look at the titles and jump into ones that look relevant. Yeah, a lot of Kubernetes is so interconnected that if you can keep up with what's going on, and it's really hard, you will actually start to make connections across issues, which really helps. A lot of times, someone will say, oh, I'm seeing a flake going on, and that'll jog something in my memory about, oh, well, this pull over here went in a couple days ago, and that might be related. But it's not easy. I will say for Flake specifically, the triage board is really fantastic. We can probably get a link to that, but there's a triage board that scrapes all the test results, and you can actually see for particular test jobs or for particular tests how flaky they've been, whether they've been passing, failing, and so sometimes that'll give a really clear signal, like, something went in 2 days ago that. Like that's the moment where things went sideways.
Awesome. And I'm going to share that screen, the test grid in 1 second here. While I do that though, James, same question for you. How do you manage your time between your JetStack commitments and your upstream commitments and your hobbies and everything else that goes on in life? Oh, I think James might be frozen. And Steve, same question really quick. Oh, no, James isn't frozen anymore. James, can you hear me? I don't think he can hear us. Oh, no, he looks like there he is.
Yeah. I'm definitely closing things at the minute, trying to get things to hopefully that's a bit better. I don't know.
No, that's good.
Cool. Well, I didn't quite catch what you just said there. Did you ask me?
So it was pretty much the same question that Jordan had, which was just a general, how do you manage your time? Folks see Jordan do a ton of work on the project. So we're curious about how he manages his time. So how do you manage yours, especially with priorities to your company and upstream and other hobbies and things like that?
Yeah, I think I think what Jordan said there, it's like sleep is overrated is the first thing, but I think actually it's very difficult to stick to that. So kind of, I'm trying to, it's a tough one, I think. And it's a case of, yeah, triaging. And I think letting some things go as well, I think is a big one. And not trying to always be in every nook and cranny. I don't know. I still don't know how Jordan does it. And I'm kind of like listening intently, and I need to go back and make sure I heard the end of what, what happened there to start cutting out. But yeah, I have a pretty, actually based on Tim Hawkins' email rule filters, I'm trying to implement something like that where I'm filtering things down and throwing a lot of emails away and just kind of marking them as archived straight away when they're not, when I know that there's someone else who might be able to help out. With Cert Manager specifically, I kind of go through waves of, right, we're up to 140 issues that need dealing with. So just sitting down for 4 hours and just powering through them. I think it is a tough one, no matter what you do, really. Yeah, I really like the idea of listening out for keywords though on Slack. That's a really good one.
Yeah, same. I'm a Slack admin, and I was like, why have I not heard of that? I listened to certain channels and groups, but Jordan, that's pretty great. Thanks for that share.
Yeah, just a warning, you got to be careful with that as well. Because I was like, oh, I'll just keyword a bunch of things, and then you're in notification bankruptcy before you even know it.
True. Yeah, like don't keyword search the, yeah.
Kubernetes.
Or Kubernetes. Yeah, exactly. Make sure you're pretty specific with your keywords there, or notification hell will ensue. Steve, what about you? Time management? How do you manage your upstream versus your mountaineering?
A smaller set of things to care about, like that always helps. I think it's obvious when Jordan's got his hands all over the entire project that that's a huge amount of commitment, but it's a lot easier if you have a smaller amount of things you care about, and that might feel like a little bit of a cop out or something, but that's totally fine, right? Like the more you focus on a small area, the better you can be integrated into it. And then just I think James said as well, like not being okay with not touching stuff. Like you see it come in, maybe you let somebody else know that something happened, and then just let it go, which very hard to do, but necessary because there's just too much.
Fair. All right, I'm going to share my screen right now because I'd love for folks to see Test Grid if they've not seen it before, and I have a feeling that a lot of folks listening have not. Can everybody see the Test Grid screen?
Yep.
Okay, Jordan, you want to talk about this a little bit?
Sure. So we've got different areas. These are sort of high-level groupings of tests and test jobs. And so if you jump into one of them, maybe SIG release would be a good one. This is fine too. That's fine.
Yep.
And then SIG release master blocking. That's a pretty good one. So this shows a bunch of test jobs. We've got a summary page here that kind of gives a high-level overview for each job of whether the job is green or flaky or failing. And so you're on the summary tab now. If you jump into one of the tabs, maybe Basil test, or let's do Basil test.
And we are loading results from the server.
Yeah, that's how you know it's going to be an interesting one.
Oh, good.
There we go. Okay, so this is showing the results of the Basil test, which is our unit test runs, and you can see the jobs go from left to right. Most recent job is on the left. Lots of different runtimes. This is running like every 5 minutes, something like that. And then vertically, you have all of the different individual tests, packages that are being tested. And so it's a long list. That's why it took so long to load. And so this job is actually one required to be green for stuff to merge to master. So it stays green mostly, basically all the time. But if something is flaking, you'll see occasional reds creep in. a particular package will start flaking. And so the way this works is it sorts those to the top. So tests that are flaky will show up as red blocks in this list. And if you change the size to super compact. And it reloads. That's awesome. There you go. So this gives you a really quick way to see sort of the health of a particular job, particular tests, drill down to particular failures. And if you click on that, it's hard when it's super compact. But if you click on that, that would bring up that particular test run, and you could start looking at the logs for that test, try to figure out what went wrong. And so when a problem has been introduced, especially on jobs that aren't blocking for things to merge into master, this gives us a quick way to triage that, to drill down and say, oh, well, we can see it went solid red here. Let's look at the last green run and the first red run and see what the difference is between them and what changed.
Awesome. All right.
Steve, you want to add anything to that? This is your baby.
Yep. I think he's trying to find his mute button. There he is.
Yeah. No, I mean, that was a really good overview. We actually had a lot of cool changes come in about February to make that page loading a lot faster, because it used to be quite a lot slower.
So that was faster.
That was faster?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Our long tail before was like 20, 30 seconds on some of the dashboards.
Yeah, I'm now thinking I need to get that set up as well, because we don't run that. It looks very useful.
Yeah, no, I definitely like, that's why I wanted to show it. I think not a lot of people use it, or not enough rather. So I think it's an important resource. What are some other important, go ahead, I'm sorry, Steve. Oh, wow. I want one.
Stickers. Eric's got them.
And you made the stickers not be all green? That's terrible.
Yeah, there's actually, it's like half red, so, you know.
Yeah, definitely. I have a feeling we're going to get a high influx of requests today for test grid stickers. So we should talk offline, Steve, about how we can make that happen. Well, so speaking of test grid, what are some other resources like test grid that you think people don't know about that you want to amplify from just an upstream contribution perspective?
So I think one of the things that is fairly new still, and sometimes there's a couple rough edges, but generally is super useful, is the PR dashboard. So on Kubernetes, the large repo, this doesn't apply. But if you're a contributor to like any of the sort of ancillary repos that sit on the side, like little component repos, you're probably using a program called Tide for merging. And I want to see if I can quickly pull up.
Yeah, that's fine. And feel free to share your screen too, Steve.
What this looks like. And so at the, what we're trying to solve with this little tool is helping people understand, what's going on with my PR right now and why hasn't it merged quite yet. Let's see if sharing the screen is going to work. Is that coming across?
Yep. Good for me.
Okay, so if, and this is on an entirely different repo, but it'll look very similar if you're writing a pull request for like many of the pull requests underneath the Kubernetes organization that are not in the Kubernetes repo specifically. So down at the bottom in the little status section, there will be a little status from a program called Tide, and it'll try to give you a little bit of an overview of saying, oh, your PR right now, we can't merge it. It needs a couple labels. And if you click the details link, it'll take you to a page, pull request status. And what this is hopefully going to show you is, we've got your pull request, what jobs have run on it, and maybe a couple of them have failed. And then aside from that, it tries to digest what's the current state of your PR and what do you need to do to make it merge. And so here you notice that it doesn't meet the merge requirements, and it's got 2 labels that are required and missing, and they're LGTM and approved. And so you should be able to look at this and say, oh, okay, I need to resolve my labels for this PR. And then go ahead and figure out for each PR what it's trying to do. And the interesting thing here too is like that little link at the bottom of your PR will help you figure that out for a specific pull request. But if you look just for query by author, and I have no idea, okay, cool. It'll actually pull up every single pull request that's out there for you. And it looks like for this author specifically, the other pull requests that he had are merged. But if we look at Jordan,
oh, don't do that.
He has a couple that are open.
Maybe.
Taking a while because there's so many, I guess.
Sure. So he's actually got none that are open. Good job, Jordan. Oh, no. Okay, here. Sorry. Yeah, so this one, he's got a hold on there, which means, he's still working on it and, he doesn't want it to merge quite yet. So this is the sort of page that will be linked at the bottom as soon as the Tide program is managing the merge queue for your repo. And so that's right now, Tide is managing the merge queues for quite a lot of repos in the Kubernetes organization, just not the main one today. So this is a cool tool. If you click that little details button, it'll take you to this page. And that should be, a little bit easier of a way to figure out what's going on.
Awesome. James, what are some resources that you think maybe either go unnoticed or not noticed enough that you think are super beneficial?
One that I'll quickly share my screen. One that it's not brand new or anything like that, but I do find really useful when you've got, I don't know if you can see there. Yeah, one that I find really useful is just on the Kubernetes. It's called. This is the tool that sucks up and displays all of the logs from test runs. There's also got this extra PR dashboard, which I think it's this has been around for a long time, and I'm not sure. Steve will know. I think it might even be being replaced at some point, but with something similar, maybe not. But this just kind of gives you an overview of the things that need attention, what you've got to look at and what you've got, like your own pull requests that are going out, with some basic heuristics to tell you kind of what needs to happen next. Mine's pretty small in comparison to some, I'm sure, but this can be really useful especially if you kind of leave something for a while and you get a bit of a backlog, or you've got a load of pull requests you've opened up. This can be really helpful just to get an overview of what needs to be looked at, and it just points you in the right direction. Yeah,
awesome. All great resources, so I'm +1ing all of them. I do also love the PR dashboard as well. If you search my name, you'll see a ton of failing spell checks. I'm leading the project for I can't spell. Just kidding. Well, kind of. Next question is from Jace in chat, and he asks, how do we keep up with all of the changes? I guess, Kubernetes is an ever-changing project. Steve and I actually talked about this last night. And what are your go-to sources of updated information that will keep you abreast of all of those changes?
So I definitely... Oh, no.
No, go ahead, James. No, please, take it.
I'd say there's a large part is, like Jordan said earlier, being in the Slack channels that you're interested in. Just kind of in the morning, I tend to go and look until it gets back to, yesterday. And just have a quick read through. I guess, I've got the bit of time to actually do that. But when it comes to actually major headline releases, that doesn't kind of give you a massive overview just looking at Slack. So major headline release, I have to say, I get it when the changelog comes out, when they're kind of being assembled. That's always, I tend to sit down and really find the time to read through that whole changelog. There's always some really interesting things. And they're very well written, so +1 to things to release through. There's a lot of work there, and then all the release notes as well that get written all the time by everyone.
Yay, Doc.
Yeah, I'll agree with the release notes thing, even for point releases. So seeing what went in, the emails that get sent out usually have a changelog that's interesting, and I'll usually end up diving into a few of those and taking a look. I use issue and PR queries filtered by SIG a lot. Like I said, lead SIG auth, and so I'm triaging those things a lot. But the other ones that I'm interested in, API machinery, CLI, things like that, I will look at issues filtered to a SIG. So for SIG auth, I'll throw this in the Slack channel. That looks something like that.
Cool.
And that can be a more manageable list of things to go through. If you're, I mean, if you pull that one up, you know, the first page has things going back, I don't know, a few weeks. So it's a little more manageable than the fire hose that is all issues and all PRs. So if you're interested in a particular area, filtering by label works pretty well.
Even our project governance changes rapidly.
Mm-hmm.
How do you keep up with the changes to not just code, but community and how we're structured? And I mean, even Steve can probably talk about even just contributor workflow because we're constantly making changes for the better. How do you keep up with those things that aren't necessarily related to maybe your immediate day-to-day, but yet affect it nonetheless?
I think keeping an eye on the like the Kubernetes dev and SIG contributor experience mailing lists is huge. And then for everything that is like not machine parsable, you have to, well, I personally end up just finding people that I trust will tell me the important things, which I know that approach doesn't really scale and is a lot harder when you don't know who to ask, but I haven't found a better one yet. But I will say for code to GitLog has a lot of really cool bells and whistles, and I found myself writing scripts to look at changes for specific areas of the code by specific people, you know, in specific timeframes and whatnot.
Awesome.
For some of the lower traffic repos, like I actually watch the community repo. So in GitHub, you can say watch, and you'll actually get a notification for every issue and PR that gets opened. That is a good ping to kind of say, hey, here's a new thing that is going on. And usually I will look at the first notification for a particular issue and say, okay, I'm glad I know that's going on, and then I'll mute it. So at the bottom of the email, there'll be a link to mute. And that keeps the overall traffic manageable. I don't get notifications from then on for that one, but it pokes me whenever something new gets opened up. And then I can stay subscribed to the things that I'm interested in and mute the ones I'm not. That doesn't work for Kubernetes. Don't watch Kubernetes because you'll exceed your mail quota in like 8 seconds. But for lower traffic ones, that works pretty well.
James, you had something to add?
I was just going to say, just wouldn't want to deceive anyone and think that my GitHub notification inbox. Look now, I've got 658 unread notifications there, so the GitHub notification workflow doesn't really work for me.
Yeah, I think you and most 9 out of 10, especially on this project anyway. I too also watch the community repo. So Jordan and I might be the only folks that do that, because anytime I say that I watch any repo in Kubernetes, people just, what? No, it's really cool because you can browse just the subject headings and not even open the email and feel like you know kind of what's going on and what's ahead of you. All right. Now, the next question comes from a new contributor, and they keep hearing that testing or building tests, fixing tests, and issue triage is the way in. However, that seems ambiguous to them. They can't necessarily find any docs that would allude to how to actually enter into those areas. And with issue triage, they say that there aren't enough help wanted and or good first time issues in the pot or in the stack rather. What are some advice tips on those subjects for new contributors on how they could ramp up and get more, I guess, acclimated with those things, especially with, build tests / fix tests?
So my first thought is that for fixing tests, usually when there's a flaky test, it's because the people who work in that area don't know, haven't been able to track down the flake yet. And so I'm not sure that is the best way for a new contributor to get involved. That's usually kind of a tricky interaction, something that is tough for people who are even involved in the project already. Adding new tests, if you look for packages that don't have any underscore test files in them, then that is a package with no unit tests. And depending on the package, this kind of goes back to the ask questions before you start coding. That could be a good place to add a unit test. So if you find a package with no tests and kind of ask around in the Slack channel, hey, would it make sense to test this function or that function? That would probably be a pretty straightforward place to start, especially if the functions you're testing are small. For the help wanted thing, I think Carolyn,
Yep.
Vinslick, and maybe Nikita.
And Nikita, yep.
Just put together a pretty great guide for what should go into a help wanted issue. That was kind of vague and ambiguous before, and people would tag issues that were actually very complex issues help wanted just because, hey, I'd love it if someone would help with this, and it wasn't really focused towards new contributors. So there's a good guide out there now. I agree that there aren't enough of them, but that might be a symptom of the issues we have that are long-lived not being straightforward to deal with.
How can sub-project owners and folks that are in positions of decision-making do a better job of that kind of issue triage with labeling, Jordan, or any advice there for them?
Yeah, I think a fair amount of it is just time. So there are few people wearing a lot of hats right now in a lot of areas. And when you have the same person kind of responsible for running process and being tech lead for an area and doing design and review and design themselves, people get squeezed. And one of the first things that gets squeezed out is kind of that grooming delegation work, which is when you take a step back and look at it, doesn't make sense, but just realistically, that's what happens. I think what we're trying to do is tease apart those different roles and try to spread that across multiple people. So a lot of the SIGs are working through this right now, taking what used to be one person or two or three people and spreading the roles across multiple people. That's in progress. And as those get spread across people, we'll have more time to go do this kind of grooming triage, summarization, identification of issues that would be good for people to jump in on.
Fair. And what's just in case someone out there does not know as they're listening, can you define what a SIG is?
Sure. So SIG stands for Special Interest Group. It kind of divides the project up into I don't know how to characterize it, areas of interest. So sometimes these are functional areas. So there's SIG node, SIG CLI that are focused around like the kubelet or the command line. Sometimes these are cross-cutting areas like SIG auth or SIG architecture. And people who have interest in those areas can join the SIG and kind of follow along with discussions. It's a focal point for discussions, but then it's also a way to model ownership. So a given in Kubernetes is owned by one or more SIGs, and they are the ones responsible for fixing tests when they break and designing and implementing and moving features along. And so that's kind of how the project runs, how it's organized. So if you're interested in a particular area, find the special interest groups related to that area and subscribe to their mailing lists and join their Slack channels.
It was a awesome overview. Definitely not Twitter 140 characters worthy, but I think nothing in this project is. Steve or James, did you have any other advice for the new contributor about about how to jump into tests and or issue triage when information seems to be limited / ambiguous, but they are very excited and eager to join.
Yeah, I think one sort of like potential thorn with some of the issue triage, the closer you get to like the center of the maelstrom, maybe some like the higher stakes some of the issues are, and sometimes like that's not where you want to start because it's a little bit stressful. There's a lot of people looking at it and a lot of people are affected by it. So, and also to echo what Jordan said, like in order to actually engage a new contributor and like get them, you know, through their first couple PRs, like that takes time and that takes personal involvement. And so sometimes I think getting further away from the center and maybe finding a SIG that, like, for instance, you know, shameless plug, SIG testing, like I think we have like fewer hairs on fire situations. And so we're able to say, okay, like these are good issues and we're trying to work through, you know, that document that Nikita put out and like get them written down. But until then, just reaching out on Slack and being like, hey, I'd like to do something. We've had, you know, like pretty good success with people just coming and saying that. So until we get a better like labeling process, talking to people, I think is always going to be your best bet.
I'll also jump in and say that if you're only looking at the Kubernetes repo, you're missing a lot. So one of the things we've been trying to do for a couple of years now is carve off different tools and pieces of function and move them to other repos where they can be kind of managed with a less fire hose environment. And that can actually be tough to track down. So there can be issues and work going on that you don't even see if you're only looking at the main Kubernetes repo. And so really talking to people in the area you're interested in is the best way to find out where that work is happening and get connected to someone who can point you to good starter issues.
Yeah, I mean, I third that, I suppose. I think looking at the periphery projects is probably a really good entry point into all of it because they tend to follow a similar pattern to the main Kubernetes repo, but aren't constrained by, you know, such a strict release process. And, you know, it's not such a huge code base. And so it's easier to work with, test and get up and running. And I think the issues there as well, like Steve said, they're not necessarily so critical. So there's not such a pressure on you to actually get that thing out through the door in, you know, with all these quality. Well, I mean, obviously there's a certain level of quality that you need to adhere to, but you know, it can be tough in the main repo, I think. And just as a onboarding experience, I think there's a lot of work to be done in the outskirts, you know, ingress controllers and so on. There's lots going on in these areas, storage, CSI, all sorts. So kind of finding something, I'd say as well, finding something where you've got a real need for it too, or somewhere where you want to see improvement, kind of jumping in can often help. And open first, and then jump on Slack.
Because, you know, I'm lucky to be paid to do Kubernetes full time, but also like that's definitely a consideration. If that's, you know, that's not where you're at, sometimes the issues in the main repo they might ask a lot of you and a lot of your time.
And one of the questions that we actually have in the queue right now is from a current contributor, somebody that it sounds like has made a few contributions already and starting to get their bearings straight, but they say that they don't work for a cloud. They don't necessarily work on this full time, but they do put a lot of hours into it. How can they find a voice within the project because they feel like a lot of the design decisions are held with some of the top companies, but they have a lot of good ideas. So how can they really find their voice within the project and gain credibility?
I think some part of it may just be, you know, how much they're trying to bite off. Like again, as another shameless plug to SIG testing, you know, when we have design proposals come through, like no matter who you are in the SIG, you always post your design proposal onto the mailing list, and everyone, you know, talks about it there. You know, once in a while we'll do a KEP, but it's very open and flat, and so that may or may not be what other SIGs look like. You know, we're still like in terms of the number of people working on SIG testing, that may not be the same as other SIGs as well. And so I think like it's kind of inevitable. If you want to make a splash in a bigger pool, you have to put in a little bit more effort. So if you want to have some sort of like pivotal role, maybe try finding a project where it's just going to be more manageable. You don't have a fire hose to manage, and then you can actually do that in less of your free time.
Yeah. Sorry, John, over to you.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say test infra, I think, is a good example of that, though. I've personally found it tends to be the things you work on can be more self-contained. It can be kind of within one plugin, and it's not rolling out to thousands of users on loads and loads of clouds necessarily. I mean, it is rolling out to thousands of users, but how they interact with it is very, very different. And I've personally found that to be a really good place to kind of get involved with the project. I wouldn't say I make so many pull requests against the main Kubernetes repo. It does tend to be these sorts of test infra and so on. There's a lot of cool work going on, and that can get you used to that process.
You mentioned the kind of design decisions being focused around like major clouds or major companies. One of the values we hold is actually coming up with designs that work from the outside in. And so if you look at some of the external cloud provider work that's been ongoing for a while now, one of the things we're trying to do is make sure the Kubernetes APIs make sense whether you're running from one of the existing cloud providers or your own external cloud provider, or you don't have a cloud provider. And we're trying to make the APIs be the way that these components interact with each other. And so like one of the pull requests I actually have open right now moves the way kubelet addresses are configured to be able to be driven externally via the API. And so just because you don't have affiliation with an existing cloud doesn't mean that your input isn't valuable. In fact, that's one of the things that we are wanting to make sure we enable. And so input from someone like you is valuable. So taking a look at the proposals that are already out there and coming in with use cases and user stories about, how would I drive this if I was setting up a cluster just on bare metal, or I've got a cloud provider that isn't represented. How do I interact with this? So if you're looking for a way that doesn't involve lots and lots of time input, even just showing up and reviewing designs and asking questions that kind of highlight your use cases can be a pretty lightweight way to get involved in the process. I think you're muted, Paris.
Yep. Can you hear me now? Sorry.
Yep.
Why is finding the mute button is so dang hard sometimes, especially when you want it and you need it the most, just like fumbling around. Anyway, I'm actually trying to find the data. I think independent, which means not affiliated with any cloud / company / organization, is within our top 3, maybe even 4 to 5 contributors. So I think that folks that aren't necessarily affiliated with a major organization or cloud do indeed have impact with the project. I mean, I'm thinking of Christoph, who works at Disney, and he does major stuff for us and does not work for a cloud. So I'm sure we can all think of individuals that make great impact for the project. So if you're feeling that way, please see us, especially me, DM me on Slack. We do not want that perception whatsoever. And we want you to be valuable just as much as you do. So we actually only have 10 minutes left, and that was my last question. Let me make sure. I'm going to check all the channels one more time, check my direct messages. We're good there. And then let's check some other areas. But last but not least, panelists / mentors, do you have any questions for each other? I take it as a no, or maybe Jordan? No?
When I have questions, I ask them. So no, we're good.
All right. Well, that is going to end this session today. For those watching, we do actually have a special session at 1 o'clock. Well, actually, I'm sorry, 1 o'clock Pacific. How not global of me. That would be 8 p.m. UTC. Check your local time zone for that. But we are doing the first 30 minutes as sort of a steering committee, ask us anything / town hall. So all of your project governance questions like, what's the difference between a sub-project and a working group? Is there a difference? Why do we need them? Who's running the show? And anything in between. And then the last 30 minutes, we'll do exactly what we just did here, where we'll have some other contributors come on and everybody will have a party and answer questions. Thank you so much to all of the mentors today. It makes a great deal to the community that you're willing to sacrifice your time to answer these questions. But we do have tons of new and current contributors who are looking for mentor-like questions / relationships / experiences. So this is one of those. And we will see everyone either on the next session or next month. All right. Thank you so much. I appreciate everybody. Adios.
Bye.